that HumMingBird project has a very broad scope because we are aiming to gather quantitative and qualitative approaches. And when I say quantitative, I'm talking about the traditional approaches and also the big data and AI, partially. But if you ask me, the main contribution will be really gathering different disciplines as well as the voice of the migrants in what we are really talking about. Because our goal is to improve the migration statistics, but also reappraise the assumptions about migration, but understand the impact of policies on the migration, and also like to understand how people decide where to go, when to go, and how to choose the route. So we are talking to migrants and route. So I think this mixed method approach is the main contribution of the HumMingBird.
I think the specific remit of this project is to sort of anticipate migration flows, if not to nowcast them, because most statistics about migration are produced with a delay of at least 1 or 2 years, and many of those statistics come far too late. So what the policymakers need is very up-to-date information, not just statistics, but information about upcoming migration flows.
Something remarkable is happening, or has been happening over the last couple of years, right? So migration is a phenomenon that has always existed, that has always allowed people to find a better life or a new future, whether that is migration by choice or forced. What we see happening over the last 5-6 years, that it has, as a phenomenon, something come that has to be managed, that has been problematized, that is considered something of a challenge. We have the impression that this leads many policymakers, whether that is on a local, national or international level, to make policy decisions that not necessarily have the best possible impact on people on the move. These policy decisions are often made based on a lack of knowledge around what makes people move, what makes people migrate. I have the impression that this project hopes to contribute to a better understanding of the phenomenon of migration in all its forms.
The fact that we collaborate with so many disciplines and so many institutions from the public research and academic sector, as well as the civil society institution, all along this period is a really fruitful step which enrich and enhance our own knowledge within the center.
We actually developed a empirical framework which basically links individual migration decision to the macro level data, so that we can use a micro-funded gravity model to examine the migration behavior as well as how it's changing over time.
So the HumMingBird Consortium brings together expertise on different types of data, big data sources, satellite data, mobile phone data, social media data, and it's very difficult, very challenging to combine these in a coherent way with more traditional ways of collecting data about migration and refugees. A lot of methodologies rely on qualitative data, on interview and personal data, so this is a little like changing the zoom of your analysis. So imagine that you have results from a microscope, but you also have results from a telescope. So how do you combine these? That's the big challenge in the HumMingBird project.
My task in HumMingBird project is to detect how, using social media data, we can predict friendly cities and friendly regions for immigrants and refugees in Europe. We have developed a large-scale analysis using hate speech as an indicator of the acceptability of migrants and refugees.
We made a lot of progress, although the challenges are huge. I give an example. Yesterday we made an exercise of the kind of information that would be needed in the context of the upcoming Green Deal and the transition to 2050. We know more or less what kind of jobs are going to disappear and what kind of new jobs are going to be created, and overall it's going to be a positive result, but yeah, the whole question is whether labor markets will be able to adapt to the needs for the Green Deal. And maybe migration can play a role in that context, because not all regions of Europe to begin with are affected in the same way, and there are concentrations in regions that will lose, for example in the carbon industry, and there are concentrations elsewhere where industries will gain. And moreover, we might need to attract labor from outside the EU. That kind of information is very important, so we are checking now to what extent HumMingBird can respond to that need.
We work with mobile phone data, and that's some data that the telecom company already collects for marketing purposes. What we do is we repurpose this data for some social good, basically, to understand migration indicators. But this is challenging because the data needs to be aggregated and anonymized to such a degree that it's impossible to identify personal information in this kind of data. So it should not allow surveillance or tracking of any individuals. That requires a laborious ethical and legal evaluation of how the data exchange and aggregation and anonymization is done. And it also requires the private company, the telecom company, to open up its data for research. And that's also challenging.
But what we have experienced is that we are a team where a lot of computer scientists, data scientists, geographers, ethnographers, social scientists, political scientists, and communications working together. We also have society with us, and when you talk about mixed methods, it is not about having a multi-method approach. Yes, we have multi-method, but we are trying to triangulate our results, so it makes it puts a high and important significance on communication and collaboration. That's why we are trying to collaborate, the social scientists and the data and computer scientists very closely to see what are the potential areas.
One of the main insights of our task is to find a relationship between Twitter data and the acceptance of people. In other words, we can get an indicator of how a specific city is friendly or not with migrants just by looking at social media.
I think we achieved more than what we expected. The project was initially, when it's conceived, I think we were very ambitious about what we are going to do. And then in the beginning of the project, we were thinking that it's going to be very challenging. However, eventually we managed to deliver all the products that we promised. And then we did something even more than what we promised in the work agreement. So I think in this regard, we overachieved.
I think we have covered pretty well what we promised, and we even go beyond that because we are very lucky to have a very collaborative and very open consortium, so there are a lot of ideas also ongoing. I think that's an advantage of the mixed methods. Yes, I think we are meeting the expectations and we are even going beyond that, but we also experience some challenges due to COVID because a substantial part of our studies were designed to be ethnographic works, and the COVID has a serious impact because we are talking about migration hubs.
The link between climate change and migration is a very subtle one. Migration goes slowly, whereas climate change occurs with peaks and lows and with heavy fluctuations. So we need to disentangle the mechanisms that produce a causal effect on migration. There's a lot to be done in that regard. That is one type of gap in the information. And although we are, I think, producing cutting-edge information at this moment, there are still a lot of questions that remain unanswered.